Well, thank you. All right, I got that note that we're recording. So let's get started with our agenda here today. I'm really happy to see so many people on the call today for this Foster Youth to Independence 101 training. We're going to start here with a little welcome and introduction. You'll meet our team, get to know who we are and why we're here. And then we'll just move into hearing who else is here in the room and trying to get a little picture of who's here today attending the training. From there, we'll move into an introduction to the Foster Youth to Independence Initiative. We'll just give an overview of the program and the impact. We'll then move into the FYI voucher itself and funding. So talking about vouchers, other related vouchers to the FYI vouchers and how they are funded. Then we'll move into key stakeholder roles and responsibilities. Here we'll talk about the different partners who are involved in administering FYI and then their roles. So we'll go into detail there. And then also in this section, we'll talk about partnership agreements among those entities. We'll then move into the Foster Youth to Independence life cycle. This is where we'll talk about the steps in the process of the Foster Youth to Independence Initiative. We'll start all the way from the referral, that first step, to contract. We'll go through each step in the process and then the responsible party for each of those steps. We'll then move into getting started and talk about some steps you all can take to start this initiative in your localities and talk through some challenges you may encounter and how to overcome those challenges. And then we'll wrap up with a closing. We'll have some time for Q&A and some other items as well to hear from you all, any items that you have. Okay, so let's move into our welcome and introduction. I'll pass it over to the Virginia Department of Social Services team to give their introductions.
Welcome and thanks for attending the FYI 101 training. My name is Letha Moore Jones and I'm the State Independent Living Coordinator and Youth Services Supervisor with Virginia Department of Social Services, and I've been in this position for 23 years. I also have with me today Monica Cabell and Gwen Costello, both are Youth Services Program Specialists who work with me, and they're also a very part of our core BDSS FYI team. Most of you know that many of our young people with lived experience in foster care face housing insecurities. And according to the Annie E. Casey Foundation, nationwide, 50% of the homeless population has spent time in foster care. An estimated 20% of the young adults who are in care become homeless the moment they emancipate at age 18. So we know from data and direct experience, many of our youth who transition out of foster care struggle to find permanent, affordable, and stable housing. But we also know there's a valuable resource called Foster Youth to Independence, the FYI housing voucher for this population. Unfortunately, we have learned over the couple of years that there are barriers that have caused the FYI voucher to be underutilized in Virginia. We hope to change that in the near future so youth and young adults will have access to housing wherever they want to live in Virginia. We cannot do this work by ourselves, and then we need you. The work requires a strong collaboration with community partners. We're excited that you are here and hope you accept the call to help our young people, call to action, if you will. And at this time, I will pass it over to our very important partners, Guidehouse. They have been a great part of our team, and we will let them introduce themselves and begin the training. Thank you.
Yeah, hi everyone. My name is Jamie Muth. I'm here with Guidehouse. We're a national consulting firm that serves a number of state, local government agencies across the country. Personally, I and part of Guidehouse's Housing and Community Solutions practice. We provide support to state and public housing agencies, among many other community agencies around the country. In my previous life, I coordinated the grant application for the Foster Youth to Independence program at one of the largest public housing authorities in the country. Very quick, short and sweet. I will go ahead and pass it to Atticus.
Thank you, Jamie. Much of the same. I also am part of the Housing and Community Solutions practice at Guidehouse, and I also come from one of the largest housing authorities in the nation in my prior life. So I'm really excited to be with you all here today and talk about foster youth to independence.
And I guess I'm last. My name is Shelly. I work with our state and local government team at Guidehouse. So I focus on work specifically geared towards state and local governments. And I've worked with many Virginia state agencies, and my focus is really on training. And so that's why I'm here with you all today. Just wanted to mention one more item is that, you know, these trainings came out of an assessment that we conducted prior to this with VDSS. We had some prior work doing a current state assessment, which means we looked at the FYI initiative and took away some, you know, this is what's happening today and this is how we can improve in the future. So you may be hearing some findings and some context from that as we move forward today in our training. So, okay, I'm going to keep moving forward. So the Virginia FYI training that we are here today is that what we're hoping here for you to get here today is to just have a basic understanding of what this initiative is and how it works. So that's one of our main objectives for this 101 training. And then the second objective is really thinking about, you know, we're bringing together multiple entities, people who may have, you know, the foster care terminology, people who have the housing terminology, and there's kind of this language barrier that we've, you know, kind of learned about. And so trying to break that down a little bit and define these terms and shed some light on the different perspectives and what people are working on, so you can kind of get a feel for what, you know, the other partners are working on and what their focus is. And then coming out of this training, we really wanted, we're really hoping that we can increase utilization of the voucher, whether it's with existing programs and being able to improve them or establishing new initiatives in new localities. And then the last thing is just streamlining FYI administration, just from some things that you learned throughout the trainings. So we wanted to get a feel for who's in this room today. It looks like we have, you know, a bunch of people here in the room. So we're going to launch our mentee polls. We'll show you how that works in just a moment. And we will ask you all to respond to these poll questions throughout the training. So if you can go to mentee.com, you can do this on your phone or on another tab in your computer. You can also, I'm going to drop the link in the chat for you all to see. Let me just drop that in a moment. And so you can either go to, if you're going to mentee.com, you just put in that code 72602707. Looks like we have a lot of dots filing in here, so excited to see who's in the room. And when you're all doing that, if you can also write in the chat your name, your agency, and your role, just in the Zoom chat as well, so we can see who's here as well. Looks like we have a large representation here from our local Department of Social Services. And I know we have 138 people on this call, so I'm going to wait till we get some more responses here till we move forward.
I am unable to do the poll at this time, but just know there's +1 person for VDSS.
I love to see it. Okay, we'll give another 15, 30 seconds for you all to drop those in the chat. And then we'll move, sorry, on Menti, and then we'll move forward to our next question. Looks like it's slowing down here. So I think when you're ready to move to the next one, we can do that. So this one is, which region do you primarily work? So you can pin on that image, just click where it is, and we should be able to see where people are dropping in from. This is cool to see. Team Central keeps jumping up there. Well, it looks like we have a wide range from all over the state, which is really awesome to see that we're not concentrated in just one section of the state, but you're coming from all over. So this is really awesome. Hoping to really spread our knowledge here today across the Commonwealth. All right, another 10 seconds for you all to drop on to pin on the image where you're coming from. Awesome. Well, it looks like we have a wide representation, so I'm excited for today's training with you all. Let's move to our next question. Why are you attending this training, and what do you hope to gain from the training? So here you can just type in a phrase or a couple sentences, and those phrases will start to pop up on the screen, and we'll have a little word bubble that will show some of our most commonly used terms as you all. Information and knowledge and understanding. More knowledge, so we got double knowledge here. Things keep changing here. This is really awesome to see as people enter. Information continues to be at the center, as well as knowledge and resources, and implementation seems to be getting larger as we go along. So education. So it really looks like everyone's coming here to learn more, to gain a better understanding, to get some more education, to learn more information, to get access to some resources. So I think we are equipped in our training that we have for you in the next hour and 45 minutes to really deliver that information. And we will also have, FYI 201 next week, which will build on everything you hear today. Okay, awesome. So those are our first 3 mentees. Keep that tab open because I will definitely be doing some more mentees throughout, and I will take it from here. Just give me a second to get my screen shared to continue the training. Awesome. Okay, we're now going to move into our introduction to FYI training, and we'll do just a brief intro before we really dive into it all. So first, we wanted to provide you all with some context about the current state, some things that we learned from our current state assessment, which is one, there is a shortage of affordable housing. That's nationally, but we're here speaking specifically to the Commonwealth of Virginia, and this severely impacts lower income individuals. So that's one piece of it. And then the second piece is in 2024, so this past year, there were 410 youth who were transitioning out of foster care on their 18th birthday, and then another 221 that were exiting fostering features at 21. So that's an extension of foster care services. So that's over 600 individuals who are transitioning out of foster care, who will now need to be looking for places to live. Those are kind of like the two aspects at play here. And this is where, the Foster Youth to Independence Initiative comes in, where it can provide impactful housing assistance, as well as supportive services to youth. So this is really what we'll be focusing on today, and we'll talk a little bit more about the impact in just a moment. And then the last thing I wanted to mention before we dive in is that there have been some localities who have implemented FYI and have done that really successfully. And there also, there is still large opportunity to increase utilization of vouchers and establish FYI initiatives in different localities and expand the number of vouchers in localities where it already exists. And so, that's one of the reasons we're here today. So I wanted to, just give a brief overview of what is foster youth to independence. I've said it about 100 times in the last 20 minutes, but kind of want to give a brief overview of what it is. So it's a housing voucher. The HUD term is a housing choice voucher, and it's made available through a partnership, and the partnership is between a public housing authority and then a public child welfare agency. So that Public Child Welfare Agency is HUD terminology, so that's why we have it here on the slide. But throughout this presentation, we're really going to be referring to the local Department of Social Services because they are the ones who serve that Public Child Welfare Agency role in Virginia. So it's a partnership between these two entities, and this is called a collective impact model. So that's the model that we have here for FYI, which means that it's bringing together organizations. So it's, organizations as well as government agency to provide one housing. And then these wraparound services, these supportive services, which we'll get into later on in the presentation. So that's how the model works. It's a partnership. And this voucher is provided to youth. And there are 3 criteria for youth to be eligible for this voucher. So 1, the youth has to be at least 18 and it has to be before their 25th birthday. So 18 to 24. They have to have left foster care or will leave foster care within 180 days. So that 180 days is a new update. So if you previously have heard about FYI and eligibility, we've moved from 90 days to 180 days. So there's kind of more flexibility there. And then the third thing is that they're homeless or at risk of becoming homeless, right? Either in that state or, when they transition out are at risk of becoming homeless. And then the last thing, is here the value to the youth. This voucher can provide a lot of money to someone. So like on average, we found that over $1,000 per month can be put towards rent, and that's how much the voucher generally gives. It's a 3-year voucher, so 36 months, and there is an option for an additional 2 years. And we'll talk a little bit more about that extension. It's not default. There are things that you need to do for that extension. So we'll talk about that a little bit later. And then the other value to you is a supportive services piece. And we'll get into that and the details of that later on in the training. So I now want to move into the impact. I think this is really, really important. We have here a quote of talking about how life-changing this voucher can be and the supportive services can be for the youth. So the first thing is, having a place to live can enable independence and self-sufficiency, right? This whole process, searching for a unit, living by yourself, is, you know, a big next stage in someone's life when they're transitioning into adulthood, and having that place to live, going through this process can really enable independence and self-sufficiency. And the self-sufficiency piece is a big part of the supportive services, and what they're geared toward is really getting the youth to be able to do this independently. The second thing is, you know, it's already hard, you know, transitioning out of the foster care system, and transitioning into adulthood, and then adding this housing piece on top of it. So this program, this initiative, can really reduce stress and anxiety, and, you know, help people afford a place to live. And then the last thing I wanted to talk about was, like, you know, this voucher, it's helping people live where they want to live, right? That's what FYI can do. I know there have been some difficulties with this, but really trying to get a youth to be able to live in the community that they want to live will, you know, not just provide them with a place to live, but be where they want to be. And just building off of this impact, I wanted to just read a quote that we have from a young adult who received the FYI voucher in Virginia. And they said, "The FYI voucher has drastically changed my life. It's the reason I can afford a safe place to live while also taking care of my family. Without it, I wouldn't be able to cover rent, bills, and necessities. We'd be struggling just to survive. The voucher gave me stability after aging out of care, a chance to build a future instead of facing homelessness. It's not just financial help, it's a lifeline. The FYI voucher gave me a foundation when I had none, and without it, I truly don't know where I or my family would be today." And so I really want to, you know, sit here for a moment and just sit with the fact of how this has really changed this youth's life, and how powerful this quote is, and how, you know, you all here today, interested in establishing this initiative or expanding access to this initiative can really, you know, you can create this experience for even more people. So that wraps up our introductory section. I'm now going to pass it over to Jamie to talk through the FYI voucher and funding.
Awesome. Thank you, Shelley. We will go ahead and jump into it and begin by level setting with a brief flow of funds, actors, and programming that's related to or governs the FYI program. And you can see that hierarchy here on the slide. So the United States Department of Housing and Urban Development, otherwise known as HUD, funds the Housing Choice Voucher, HCV, or formerly known as Section 8 program, which is then administered by public housing authorities, often referred to as PHAs, on a more localized level across the country. There are 41 unique public housing authorities in Virginia. The Housing Choice Voucher program serves households by providing them a rental voucher or subsidy that households then use to acquire housing on the private rental market, meaning the PHA provides that subsidy to the landlord on behalf of the tenant, covering about 70% of the household's rent. Special purpose vouchers operates similarly to traditional housing choice vouchers, in that the household receives the subsidy and they can shop around on the private market to find housing. However, they're specifically provided for by Congress and a line item appropriations, basically a specific funding amount to be spent for a special purpose, which distinguishes them from those regular vouchers. And then oftentimes these vouchers also come with additional requirements or specificity in referring partners. The Foster Youth to Independence program and the Family Unification program are both types of special purpose vouchers. Bringing us to why we're here today. So the FYI program provides youth at least 18 and not more than 24 years of age who left foster care or will leave foster care within that 180 days, like we mentioned earlier, and are homeless or at risk of becoming homeless at the age of 16 or older with a voucher so they can find housing on that private rental market. They have to meet all three of those criteria. This program differs from FUP, the Family Unification Program, which serves both youth with similar criteria, often referred to as FUP-Y, and here's the different criteria, They also serve families for whom the lack of adequate housing is a factor in the imminent placement of that child, the family's child, or children out of home care. And that's called the FUP-F program, FUP family program. We'll go into the evolution of FYI and the intersection of these two programs on the next slide. Great, so as I mentioned, vouchers to youth who left foster care were originally granted under the Family Unification Program, the FUP program. In 2019, there was an identified need on the federal level to expand housing options for youth transitioning out of foster care and set them up to become self-sufficient, right? So this change happened in 2019. Out of that change came the Foster Youth to Independence program, which was created to operate independently and provide additional resources to those otherwise FUP eligible youth. Main differences I want to highlight between the two programs: different federal funding allocations. There's different ways to apply and access that funding, which we'll get into even deeper in FYI 201. So that's a shameless plug for everyone to attend that training. We'll talk about it a little bit in this one as well. And then lastly, and likely most importantly to you all, the FUP vouchers that serve families don't have a time limitation, whereas the FYI and FUP Youth, FUP-Y vouchers have a 36-month time limitation that Shelley mentioned earlier, meaning the youth can only access the vouchers for 36 months with the ability to extend that time by 2 years if they meet certain requirements, which I promise we will tell you all about. All right, next slide. So why should your agency choose to administer FYI over FUP, vice versa, or both? So that FYI program allows for increased flexibility and expedited access to vouchers, specifically if your agency is applying for non-competitive funding. And we'll talk about differences between competitive and non-competitive on the next slide. But really what you need to know is that public housing agencies are able to request non-competitive FYI vouchers on an as-needed basis directly from HUD, rather than relying on a more traditional grant allocation process, which takes more time and is more work. The on-demand approach to requesting vouchers can allow PHAs, LDSS agencies to respond more quickly to the housing needs of those vulnerable youth that are in your communities, right? Public housing authorities should apply to both when the need to house youth exceeds their FUP-Y or FYI allocation. The number of vouchers they're provided is what that allocation is referring to, respectively. And then only FUP, well, really this just depends on the needs of your community. It may make more sense to serve families if it's difficult to identify youth transitioning out of foster care. And it's really just important to consider the needs of your community coming together with the different partners, public housing authorities, LDSS agencies, to determine which program is best to administer for your community. Next slide. Great, so as I mentioned, there are two types of FYI vouchers, the competitive and non-competitive, and the method for applying for each type differs. For non-competitive, PHAs can request assistance on a rolling basis. There's a form you fill out online with the specific youth your agency has identified in need of a voucher. You submit the form certifying to the eligibility information and other criteria, and wait to hear if HUD grants you your allocation. The timeline here is much faster than a traditional notice of funding opportunity or a grant application process. Agencies can only request 25 vouchers at a time, with the maximum annual award capping at 50 vouchers. And this process, right, is attractive to many agencies because of the ease of application process and the ability to request vouchers on demand with a shorter waiting period. On the competitive side, HUD issues what's called a Notice of Funding Opportunity, or a NOFO, which invites eligible applicants to apply for FYI funding. Applicants complete the requirements of the NOFO, things like completing a Memorandum of Understanding or an MOU, completing the supplemental rating factors that are part of that application package. And then the agency submits the NOFO, the Notice of Funding Opportunity, and waits to hear back from HUD on whether they receive the voucher application. This process takes typically a longer time with a longer waiting period to get that to get those vouchers to serve that youth. The pros of this are that a public housing authority may be able to acquire a larger allocation of vouchers up front, specifically for those larger PHAs. So those that have an allocation or an allotment of 2,000 plus traditional housing choice vouchers, they may be able to actually request up to 75 vouchers at one time. And then lastly, because this has like a lengthier application process, right? Competitive programs are typically set up with a little bit more thought behind it. Just, it's the name of the game. You have to complete a lot of supplemental information. So we know going in, right, the partners are engaged, they've met before, they've completed this application process together, that sort of thing. Great. All right, so a couple different HUD programs, policies to mention, both of which may impact FYI, just so you have the information up front again. First, the Family Self-Sufficiency Program is a HUD program that helps families utilizing public housing or the Housing Choice Voucher Program to increase their income and build assets. This program focuses on providing certain supportive services such as job training, education, that sort of thing to families. And if a public housing authority operates a family self-sufficiency program, you might hear it called an FSS program, they must offer youth an opportunity to participate if it's available. This program can be a great supplement for the required supportive services that have to be offered under FYI. Second, wanted to call out the Fostering Stable Housing Opportunity Amendment, which was enacted in 2020 and provides an extension of the assistance provided to eligible youth for up to 2 years beyond that 36-month time limit if the youth is participating in a family self-sufficiency program, and for youth that are actually unable to enroll, right, but who are engaged in another sort of education or workforce development or employment program for the last 9 months of the 12-month period preceding the extension. So again, 2 ways to get that extension: one, being enrolled in the Family Self-Sufficiency Program, the FSS program, or in another workforce development program for at least 9 months before that extension comes. Great. Switching gears here a little bit, I did want to talk about some state administered programs with differing eligibility criteria that serve youth in or transitioning out of foster care and how they impact FYI. And these are specific in this context to Virginia. So the Chafee Independent Living Program, it assists youth in foster care ages 14 to 21 in developing the skills necessary to help them transition from foster care to independent living. Services include career exploration, job skills. There's also housing that is provided as part of this program sometimes. So second program, Fostering Futures, that's that voluntary extended foster care program available to teens and young adults in foster care from 18 to 21. It provides youth financial and social support and services, also education, workforce training. Housing can be a part of this program as well. Both of those programs use blended funding and can be accessed through local departments of social services, with the Virginia Department of Social Services providing oversight. And the Virginia Department of Social Services also offers a housing support program, which is a time-limited housing support assistance to youth not currently participating in fostering futures, excuse me. An extremely important note, and what I really want you all to take away, is that youth may be able to utilize specific services from these programs while transitioning into FYI or to FYI. However, youth cannot have or obtain duplicative federal, state, or local housing subsidy simultaneously. So what does that mean, right? You can't have a housing subsidy at the same time in 2 different programs. That is federally not allowed by HUD. Bad things happen, so don't do that. Specifically, HUD did release some updated guidance in April that recognized, right, that longer referral time frame. So as many of you may remember, there used to be a 90-day transition timeline where youth could be referred into FYI. That's been expanded to 180 days. And with that said, a FYI or FUP youth as well may lease a unit prior to officially leaving foster care in order to ensure a smooth transition from foster care, as long as the requirements of the FUP, Family Unification Program, and FYI programs are met. Alrighty. One last important slide before we hop into some more details about the administration of FYI in Virginia, and that is that Virginia utilizes this state supervised, locally administered foster care system that does differ from many states across the nation that have a more centralized foster care model, and that impacts really how the FYI program can be set up. Specifically, as FYI currently stands in Virginia, each LDSS must enter a partnership agreement to administer FYI as opposed to that centralized Department of Social Services. Because of this localized model of foster care, right, custody of youth cannot be transferred between localities as they remain in the care of the LDSS until they exit foster care, regardless of where they're living, and that is due to funding restrictions. So as we make our way through the remainder of the presentation and your agency really begins to think about how you can apply for FYI and apply the information that you learned today, I just want you to keep that in the back of your mind, this special system, how each agency can enter and expand FYI, because it will influence how the FYI program is set up across the Commonwealth. And that, I think, brings us, yes, to our second set of poll questions. So if everybody can pull up that link again, I'll pass it back to Shelley to walk us through.
Yeah, okay, here we go. Why may PHA choose to administer non-competitive FYI? Awesome. Well, it looks like we got majority of our correct answers here, which is that flexibility piece that Jamie spoke to, is that, you know, FYI can be, sorry, my screen is bumping around a little bit, more flexible than FUP. And so that's the reason people may choose to administer non-competitive FYI. I will now move to our key stakeholders and requirements section. I'm going to replace that screen. Give me a moment. Okay, awesome. We're now going to move into our key stakeholders and requirements, as I mentioned, and walk through the responsibilities here. So wanted to start here with an overview of the FYI administrator roles in Virginia. So we're talking about who administers FYI. So I'm going to start here with the local Department of Social Services, right? We talked about how the Public Child Welfare Agency is the LDSS. That's the HUD language. Just want to drill down on that, because if you're looking at any additional resources from HUD, you'll see, you know, Public Child Welfare Agency language. So again, local Department of Social Services, the LDSS. So this is the party that's responsible for determining the eligibility of the youth, right? They've been in the foster care system, have are of the required age, etc. They refer the eligible youth to the Public Housing Authority. They prioritize referrals and then responsible to provide or secure supportive services. So we'll go into each of these responsibilities in the next section. This is just kind of a brief overview of the LDSS responsibilities in this process. Then, as we mentioned, FYI is a partnership between the local Department of Social Services and a public housing authority. And so the Public Housing Authority is focused on requesting those vouchers from HUD, right? They're the ones who actually administer the voucher, who provide the voucher to the eligible youth. So there are a lot of steps and requirements here, and we'll go into all of those also in the next section. And then in addition to these two parties that we've talked about before, there's this additional element where there are supportive services that are required by HUD to be provided to the youth. And the local Department of Social Services can provide these supportive services. The Public Housing Authority can provide the supportive services, but sometimes and often there isn't budget or capacity for either of these entities to provide the supportive services. And so that's when a third party, HUD refers to them as a third party, not supportive service provider, but here we thought it would be more clear to talk to, that is exactly what they provide, is the supportive services that are required by HUD. They provide them to the youth, and we'll talk a little bit more about these supportive services in just a moment, but these entities will come together and work together and form a partnership agreement. And so we're going to talk about in this section those partnership agreements and how they work. Before we jump into that, I want to just do a stakeholder general responsibilities and talk through, what do these three entities generally do outside of FYI? So a public housing authority, right, is focused on everything related to housing, right? So vouchers, public housing, managing federal funds, things like that. They're all focused on providing financial assistance related to housing to help people afford housing. A local Department of Social Services is really focused on working with families, ensuring safety. They do case management, they coordinate services, and connect people with resources. And then a supportive service provider here, in this context, right? You can have many different third-party entities in this realm, but here when we're talking about FYI, a supportive service provider is generally focused on housing stability and financial independence. So they also provide case management, usually, and a variety of supportive services. So let's talk a little bit more about those supportive service requirements. So we don't have them all listed here on the slides. They are in the appendix. When we share out the slides, you can take a look at those, and we really go into detail on these supportive service requirements in FYI 201. So another plug to join that training. So these supportive services are focused on helping the youth achieve self-sufficiency. So anything from education, basic life skills, money management, things like that fall into these supportive services. And it is the responsibility of the local Department of Social Services to either one, provide the supportive services, and if they can't, then secure a commitment of supportive services. So either of these are totally acceptable. They can provide them, they can secure a commitment to them, but they are responsible for making sure that these supportive services are offered to youth. And they have to be offered to the youth for at least 36 months, so those 3 years. And then on the partnership agreement front, right, we talked about, it's between, minimally the Public Housing Authority and the local Department of Social Services. And then if, a third party is providing these supportive services, they need to be included in the partnership agreement as well, because the partnership agreement needs to have and needs to document like who is providing the supportive services and, who's providing what and where it's coming from and what the supportive services entail. So that's a requirement of the partnership agreement. So those supportive services need to be secured prior to establishing the partnership agreement. And then the last thing I wanted to note here is that youth are required to be offered these supportive service requirements, but they're not required to participate in them. So they can opt out basically of these supportive services, but you do have to provide them to them and offer them to them. Okay, so now let's jump into the partnership agreements themselves. There are two types of partnership agreements. There are letters of intent and memorandums of understanding. So MOU for short. So they're both, documents that say, we're collaborating together. But a letter of intent tends to be, more basic. It's just a basic letter, maybe 1 or 2 pages. It's shorter, simpler, that just says, hey, we're going to work together towards this, shared goal. And therefore, it tends to be easier to execute than an MOU. A memorandum of understanding, an MOU, is more detailed. It goes into, each of the responsibilities of each entity that is involved in this agreement. So you're saying, okay, an MOU is more complicated. Why would I go that route? And that's because, it's required for the competitive process. So, Jamie talked about the difference between non-competitive and competitive FYI. So there's just generally a lower threshold when it comes to non-competitive and applying for those vouchers. So letters of intent can be used for non-competitive, but they cannot be used for competitive FYI. And so just, building on that process here, I have that noted here as well at the top. But when you're applying for competitive FYI, you need to have an MOU, as I just said. So that MOU, you may have already executed MOU prior to that notice of funding of opportunity coming out from HUD. So if it existed prior to that NOFO, the notice of funding opportunity, you can still use that MOU. You just have to get, some sort of signed correspondence that it's still active. So the PHA, and LDSS and all the partners have to sign and say, this is still in effect and we're still using it. Otherwise, you can always execute a memorandum of understanding after the notice of funding opportunity is released. Okay. So when you're thinking about, a memorandum of understanding and you're developing one, it can be helpful to take this as a moment to think through a few things. You have all the partners at the table communicating. So these are a few things that HUD recommends you think about. So one is data utilization. So sometimes these things are hard to track, and so you can opt to include a clause in your memorandum of understanding saying, like, we're going to share data amongst, these 3 entities. We're going to share, our FYI related data, whether it's housing, specific, or it's foster care specific data. You can choose to share that information, which will kind of help you moving forward to track information, to track your data, and to, see, okay, we want to improve on, X, Y, and Z metrics. So that can be super helpful. The other thing is liaisons. So you have multiple entities, and, it can be difficult to kind of move things along just because there's so many parties involved. And so one thing that you can do is, consider like appointing a FYI liaison at your agency or organization. So let's say like one person from the local Department of Social Services, another person from the Public Housing Authority, another person from the Supportive Services partner. And so those are the 3 people who generally are like in contact with each other and kind of the first person that you talk to. And that can be super helpful. You could also set meetings between, those 3 individuals. It doesn't have to be one person from each organization or agency. It could be 2, but kind of thinking through, how do we establish these relationships? How do we move things along faster? This is one of the things that you can do. The next thing is just, we want to drill in that throughout this process, you should always be thinking about the youth. The youth are who you're here to serve, right? This is an initiative for these youth. And thinking about, how are we going to partner with youth? How have we been partnering? How will we continue to partner? And thinking about their experiences. They have unique experiences and needs. And so engaging them, how are we going to engage with them? How are we going to partner with them? This is something that you should kind of be thinking about at every step of the way, because they are the focus. So whenever you're coming together with your groups, kind of thinking about the youth. And the last thing is really thinking about just, the program rules and compliance and making sure you've integrated everything that you needed to into the memorandum of understanding and you're meeting all the requirements, prior to submitting your application. And then just, to wrap up here, wanted to do a quick summary of these partnership agreements, right? We talked about two different ones. We talked about letters of intent and memorandums of understanding. They both come together to establish collaboration between the entities who are going to administer FYI. MOUs can be used for both competitive and non-competitive vouchers, and then letters of intent can only be used for non-competitive. So when you're thinking about applying, just keep that in mind as you move forward. Okay, I think we are up to our next poll question. So let's move forward there. Which of the following are true about MOUs and letters of intent? So this is a multi-select question. So go ahead and respond to this question. It's a bunch of text, so I'm going to read it out loud here. We have letters of intent are primarily used for competitive FYI, but can also be used for non-competitive FYI. The second item, MOUs can only be used for competitive FYI. The third thing is letters of intent can only be used for non-competitive FYI. And the fourth is MOUs can be used for non-competitive and competitive FYI. So select which of these, if 1, 2, 3, or all 4 are correct, just jump in and select the ones that you think are correct. And I'll give about another 20 seconds for y'all to read through these and respond here. Okay, so it looks like I may not have made this one super clear, so I'll just go over this point again. There are 2 correct answers here, and so just want to focus here. It looks like most people understood that MOUs can be used for non-competitive and competitive FYI. That is true. You can use them for both. It is also true that letters of intent can only be used for non-competitive FYI. So you can use letters of intent, right? The only thing is that you can only use it for non-competitive and you can't use it for competitive. So those two, that teal statement and the yellow statement, are both correct. Okay, I'm going ahead and I'm going to take back the screen from Gwen and we will move forward with our foster youth to independence life cycle.
All right. Okay, so we will get into the life cycle. So we could go to the next slide. Thank you. So now that we've talked about the partnership agreements and getting the foster youth to independence program set up, we're going to talk about connecting the youth with the voucher. So we have this graphic that shows the overall life cycle, starting at phase 0, which is identifying eligible youth and collecting their documentation, moving into phase 1 of this life cycle, referral coordination. So this includes referral of the youth, waiting list administration by the Public Housing Authority, and eligibility review by the Public Housing Authority. After phase 1, we move into phase 2, which is the housing search. So after the youth attend a briefing with the Public Housing Authority, they're issued a voucher and they can start the process of finding a unit. And then that leads into phase 3, which is the lease up. Part of this process is a request for tenancy approval document, an inspection and rent offer to the landlord by the housing authority, and the execution of a housing assistance payment contract, which we will discuss. So this is the broad overview of the FYI life cycle and connecting the youth with the voucher. So quite a few steps in the process. So just to reiterate, Phase 0 is eligibility for FYI. As we discussed earlier, there are 3 requirements for youth to qualify for FYI, and this was a question in the chat, so I'll just highlight this. They do need to meet all 3 requirements to be eligible. The first requirement is that they're at least 18 years old, but not more than 25 years of age, so they haven't reached their 25th birthday. They've left foster care or will leave foster care within 180 days in accordance with a transition plan described in section 475, subsection 5, subsection H of the Social Security Act. So I just wanted to dig into this one a little bit more. When we say left foster care can include many things. It could be foster family homes, group homes, residential facilities, foster homes of relatives, emergency shelters, and pre-adoptive homes. So the definition of foster care is pretty broad and encompassing of a lot of different situations that the youth could find themselves in. And this section 475 of the Social Security Act that we discuss basically just says that 180 days prior to the youth's 18th birthday, a caseworker will help develop a transition plan with the youth, and this plan focuses on housing, health insurance, education, and employment services. So, that kind of meets up with the foster youth to independence criteria, the 180 days. And finally, the last piece of eligibility criteria is that the youth is homeless or at risk of becoming homeless at age 16 or older. So someone had asked in the chat, would a youth be eligible if they're not at risk of being homeless? And if that was the case, then they would not be eligible for FYI voucher. So next, continuing on with phase 0, we get into the gathering information for referral piece of the process. So to begin, the local Department of Social Services are responsible for initiating the foster youth to independence voucher process by identifying an eligible youth and submitting a referral to the local PHA, Public Housing Authority. So the important keywords here are identifying eligible youth and submitting a referral. So there's a little caveat here. The Public Housing Authority may also identify a potential youth who is eligible for an FYI voucher. However, the local Department of Social Services must be the entity to verify eligibility, to verify an eligible child welfare history, and be the one to refer the youth to the PHA. So identification of an eligible youth can be taken by a bunch of different stakeholders, but at the end of the day, the local Department of Social Services must be the one who certifies the eligibility of the youth and refers them to that public housing authority. Continuing, the local Department of Social Services are also responsible for developing a system of prioritization for referral to the Public Housing Authority based on the youth's level of need and the appropriateness of the intervention. So what this means essentially is that that local Department of Social Services is responsible for having their own system of seeing which foster youth identifying which ones are not only eligible, but who is the most eligible. So an example of a system of prioritization might be you might have one youth who will leave foster care in 180 days, but maybe they've identified that they have relatives that they could crash with, or they could couch surf before they find a housing opportunity. And perhaps there's youth B who has already left foster care and is already homeless. A system of prioritization would identify youth B as being more in need of housing at this time, more in need of an FYI voucher, so the LDSS might prioritize their case. Continuing, the local Department of Social Service should include information on youth eligibility for an FYI voucher, including their date of birth, the date they're set to leave foster care, and their identified risk of becoming homeless. I wanted to drill down on that identified risk of becoming homeless. This could mean different things. an identified risk of being homeless could be that they're housing insecure, like I mentioned earlier. Maybe they're not sleeping on the street, but they are couch surfing. They don't have a place of their own yet. That could be an identified risk of being homeless or becoming homeless. It could also mean that they're sleeping rough, that they have nowhere to go, not even a shelter, and that they're on the streets. So an identified risk of becoming homeless can encompass many different things. The local Department of Social Service should also coordinate with the youth in advance of submitting the referral to gauge their interest in the FYI initiative. This is a very basic component. We just want to make sure that the youth that are being referred are interested in going through this process. So the local Department of Social Service needs to coordinate with them on that piece. Okay, so moving into the phase 1, referral coordination. So this is when we're going to have the Public Housing Authority and the local Department of Social Service coordinate through this referral process. So the Public Housing Authority administers the FYI initiative in partnership with these local departments of social services. So as I mentioned before, the local Department of Social Service is the one who certifies that a youth meets eligibility requirements in Section 8X of the 1937 Act. This is the Housing Act of 1937. And Section 8 is the Section 8 that we all know as the Housing Choice Voucher Program. I just wanted to clarify that. So once they've certified that the youth meets those eligibility requirements, they will refer that youth to the Public Housing Authority. The Public Housing Authority will receive the written certification from the local Department of Social Service, and the Public Housing Authority will be the one to determine whether the youth meets the HCV, the Housing Choice Voucher Program eligibility requirements. And then the PHA conducts all other processes relating to voucher issuance and administration. One thing we wanted to highlight is that in order to maintain an audit trail, the Public Housing Authority should keep the referral and certification from the local Department of Social Services regarding the use eligibility for an FYI voucher. And this is just in case, HUD or some other stakeholder with a public housing authority, if they want to perform an audit, this will just certify that the public housing authority is undertaking the FYI process as they should. Continuing with referral coordination, as I discussed earlier, a referral may come from other agencies than the LDSS or the Public Housing Authority. So some third-party referring agencies could be a continuum of care who coordinates the homelessness services for a jurisdiction. It could also be another state or local department, perhaps like a Department of Health and Human Services, or an educational, philanthropic, or faith-based organization. So all of these third-party agencies could be the ones that identify an eligible youth and refer them to the Public Housing Authority. But in cases where the referral comes from a third party, the local Department of Social Service and Public Housing Authority will still be responsible for determining eligibility. And this includes the local Department of Social Services written certification that the youth is eligible. So the example I'd give in this situation, say a continuum of care has a foster youth who just left the foster youth program who is occupying one of their shelter beds. They identify this foster youth as being eligible for the FYI program, and maybe they refer them to the Public Housing Authority. But ultimately, the Public Housing Authority needs that certification from the local Department of Social Services. So the PHA would take that referral from the continuum of care and then forward it along to the local Department of Social Services and say, hi, we have a third party who identified an eligible youth. Then the local Department of Social Service would enact their procedures to identify eligibility and ultimately submit that written certification to the Public Housing Authority. So continuing with phase 1 referral coordination, there is waiting list administration, which is undertaken by the Public Housing Authority. So once the youth is referred to the Public Housing Authority, they will be placed on the FYI waitlist according to the policies laid out in the Public Housing Authority's administrative plan. This is an important document to know. An administrative plan dictates the policies and procedures for a public housing authority's housing choice voucher program. So this includes waiting list administration and eligibility criteria. So I really just wanted to highlight, especially for maybe our non-PHA audience on this call, how important the administrative plan can be as a resource, not only for different stakeholders in this process, but for the youth themselves. It lays out how a local public housing authority will dispense their housing choice voucher program, including the FYI voucher. So this could be a great resource for youth to prepare for undergoing eligibility screening, or to understand the requirements of the program once they are admitted. So this could be a huge resource for the stakeholders in the process and the youth. Public housing authorities that administer FYI must update the administrative plan to include information on how they will implement the initiative prior to leasing FYI vouchers. So for the public housing authority stakeholders on today's call, this is something that I want to call out for all of you, is that before you can go ahead with administering FYI, the administrative plan does need to be updated to include additional information about that program. And like Jamie said, a shameless plug, we'll discuss in the 201 presentation a bit more on the administrative plan and updating it for the FYI initiative. And if you look on this slide, there's a quote from an anonymous youth who has accessed the FYI voucher in Virginia, who said, quote, "It has made it so I am able to afford to live. Without the voucher, there is no way I'd be able to pay rent, utilities, plus all my other bills and living costs. It really has made it so much easier and less stressful because I know I will be able to pay my rent and bills and live comfortably." So that just shows the impact that this program has on the youth. So moving right along, still in phase one, we go into the eligibility review. The eligibility review is undertaken by the Public Housing Authority. Once the Public Housing Authority selects the youth off of the waiting list, they will undergo this eligibility screening according to the procedures laid out in the administrative plan, like we discussed. So the first component of eligibility screening is income and asset verification. Applicants' income must be at qualifying levels for assistance per HUD income limits, and this is set by location. So the Public Housing Authority will certify that the youth meets the income and asset limits set forth. They'll also certify the identification and citizenship of the youth. Applicants must be a U.S. citizen or an eligible non-citizen as defined by HUD. The head of household must have a valid Social Security number. So this will also be certified by the Public Housing Authority through the eligibility review. Next, family composition and size. The Public Housing Authority verifies the family composition to assess the housing needs of the applicants. So by and large, the family composition and size for the foster youth independence program will probably just be one person. It will be the youth themselves, but there are some situations such as when foster youth have their own children or are in legally binding relationships where the family composition for this population might be larger than just the youth themselves. And finally, the Public Housing Authority will run a criminal background report. This is required by HUD. Applicants undergo criminal background screening to ensure no findings that bar the applicant from receiving assistance. There are some components of the criminal background report that are automatic denials per HUD guidance. So this is another place where the administrative plan is a great resource for seeing these eligibility requirements and helping youth identify whether they'll be eligible. The agency providing supportive services may support youth in gathering documentation to confirm eligibility. So like I said, the administrative plan lays out all of the different documentation and information that will be required during an eligibility screening by the Public Housing Authority. So supportive service partners can help youth prepare for that by collecting their documentation or determining what information they will need going into this process. So now we move on to phase two, the housing search. So once the youth has been selected from the wait list and undergone eligibility screening, the Public Housing Authority will contact the youth to attend a voucher orientation briefing. So this voucher orientation briefing will explain how the FYI initiative works and the requirements of the initiative. After the orientation, a voucher will be issued. And as a best practice, we recommend that the agency providing supportive services should attend the briefing to support the youth and gain insight on the housing search process. We have a quote on the right from an anonymous independent living coordinator in the Eastern region of Virginia who said, these youth were given the peace of mind of being an adult with housing. I had one youth that had a girlfriend and they had just given birth to a baby, and they were allowed to be placed together, so the FYI initiative also kept families together. So this just speaks to my earlier point that family composition for this population may be more complex than sometimes just the youth themselves, and also shows how these supportive service coordinators can really be a resource that helps get this youth connected with the FYI voucher. So following the briefing, the orientation, the Public Housing Authority must inform FYI youth of at voucher issuance of the following four pieces of information. The first of which is that the available FYI supportive services, the existence of any other programs or services, and their eligibility for such programs and services. So this just speaks to the point that Shelley made earlier that youth are not required to accept the supportive services, but the Public Housing Authority does need to make it clear that they are available to the youth. Second, the PHA must inform the youth of the Family Self-Sufficiency Program, which is also called FFS or FSS. The FFSS program is administered by public housing agencies, and it incentivizes eligible families to work towards opportunities that will enable them to achieve economic independence and reduce dependence on welfare assistance and rental subsidies. So the Public Housing Authority needs to notify the youth of the Family Self-Sufficiency Program, and this only applies to public housing authorities that administer an FSS program. Next, they need to notify the youth of potential placement in or on the waiting list for the FSS program. So if the Public Housing Authority has this program, they'll be notified, the youth will be notified if they are placed on the waiting list for the program. And finally, to something Jamie spoke about earlier, they'll be notified of the Fostering Stable Housing Opportunity or FSHO requirements for receiving an extension of assistance. And as we discussed, the FSHO amendments were enacted in 2020, and these amendments made changes to the assistance provided under Section 8 of the U.S. Housing Act of 1937. So all of these components need to be, the youth need to be further briefed on them after their orientation session. Next slide. So continuing on with phase 2, the housing search, now that we are at the point where the youth is issued a voucher, so following the briefing, a Public Housing Authority will issue a FYI voucher to the youth. So now is the point where the youth can begin their housing search. Very exciting. The voucher will have an initial search time of 120 days. Public housing authorities must approve the first extension request, and each extension must be for a minimum of 90 days. So there is an initial search term of 120 days, but youth can request and receive an extension for up to 90 days for the first extension. And public housing authorities must, on at least one occasion after the voucher issuance, contact the applicant prior to the initial term of expiration to remind them about the term expiration date and the process for requesting an extension of the initial term. This is a lot of words, basically just to convey that public housing authorities need to reach out to the youth during their initial search term to let them know that there is an option for extension. So housing search and lease up. The housing search and lease-up process can be one of the most challenging aspects of the FYI voucher process we found. So we recommend that youth often need extra support navigating these processes, particularly with security deposit assistance, furnishing their apartments, and/or identifying landlords who may be amenable to accepting substandard credit. The point that I like to make here is I recently just went through an apartment search in the city I live in, and that felt super daunting even to me as an adult with, stable income and a prior rental history and stable credit. So, the youth will need support through this process because they don't have experience with the housing search in the private housing market. So they need support navigating these different processes, and that's where supportive service coordinators can come in and really offer as a resource. So continuing on with the housing search, now the youth is tasked with finding a unit. So once issued the voucher, the youth will begin looking for a unit. Youth tend to struggle with the housing search, and this creates a great opportunity for supportive service partners to assist by guiding the youth through the following HUD recommended steps. So these come from the Department of Housing and Urban Redevelopment themselves. So the first is choosing a location. So youth and their supportive service partners should consider schools, transportation, community resources, personal needs, and employment when looking at a location to potentially lease a unit. Also, when searching for housing, HUD recommends using websites, reviewing HUD's resource locator, visiting units in person, checking with local housing agencies for landlord lists. All of these can be great ways for helping youth to search for housing. They also recommend being prepared, referring landlords to HUD's website for more information on the foster youth to independent initiative benefits. Also being prepared by budgeting for application fees and security deposit and providing landlord advocacy services. This is one thing we found when interviewing different stakeholders in Virginia with the Foster Youth Independence program is, having landlords that are already familiar with the program and familiar with the Public Housing Authority and the local Department of Social Services can really be instrumental in getting youth through the door and helping youth to navigate landlord requirements like credit or like employment that they might not have stable at that time. Another thing recommended by HUD is knowing your rights, learning about local laws protecting voucher holders. Some communities prohibit landlords from discriminating against renters that use voucher assistance. These are all good to know going into the housing search process. And finally, HUD recommends avoiding barriers such as units with much higher than the payment standard, or units unlikely to pass inspection. These are good things to know so the youth doesn't go through the application process for a unit that probably will not be accepted by the Public Housing Authority. So after phase 2 of looking for a unit, finding a unit, we move on to phase 3, which is leasing up the unit. And the first component of leasing up a unit is request for tenancy approval. So once the youth finds a home that they're interested in living in, they will submit a request for tenancy approval or RFTA packet. This initiates the approval review process with the Public Housing Authority. The packet includes information about the structure of the unit, utilities, owner certifications, and more. So the landlord must also complete and sign portions of the RFTA alongside the youth, and public housing authorities suspend the housing search time once an RFTA is submitted. So if the youth is in the middle of their initial search term for a unit and they submit this request for tenancy approval, that 120-day period will pause while the Public Housing Authority works with the landlord and works with the youth to identify if this unit is eligible for voucher assistance. And as a best practice, supportive service partners should help the youth by communicating with landlords and help them complete the packet before submitting it to the Public Housing Authority. Continuing with the lease up process, phase 3 of the life cycle, we have the inspection and rent offer component. So the Public Housing Authority will contact the landlord to schedule an inspection of the unit. The property must meet health and safety standards. These are publicly posted on HUD's website. So this is another resource that might be useful going into the housing search with the youth, for the youth to know, what kinds of properties would be deemed eligible for housing assistance. Alongside that, the Public Housing Authority will determine if the proposed rent for the unit selected by the youth is financially reasonable for the area. The Public Housing Authority may negotiate with the landlord to ensure that the rent is reasonable compared to similar units that are unassisted. And this piece of rent reasonableness is determined by HUD, and it's based on local data for a jurisdiction. So again, this is another place where supportive service partners can help set up youth expectations by letting them know that there is limits on the rent that a public housing authority will support. So this is just important to know as they look for a unit. So the public housing authority will determine that rent reasonableness at this point in the process. And finally, if the Public Housing Authority determines that the unit doesn't meet inspection standards or rent reasonableness standards, then the identified unit will be rejected, unfortunately. So if the unit is rejected, the youth will be issued an updated voucher with the amount of time left to search for housing. As I mentioned earlier, the initial search term pauses once they're undergoing through this process. But if the unit is found to be ineligible, they will be reissued their voucher with the remaining time to search for housing. And the housing search time does not reset. However, the youth can request an extension, as I discussed earlier. So continuing on with the lease up process, we have the housing assistance payments, or HAP, contract execution. So a housing assistance payment contract is a legal agreement between a public housing authority and a property owner specifying the terms for a rental subsidy under an HCV. So at this point in the process, the public housing authority has determined that the identified unit by the youth is eligible based on rent reasonableness standard, eligible based on health and safety standards, and so now they're going to enter into this HAP contract between the public housing authority and the landlord. So the public housing authority agrees to make a housing assistance payment, or a HAP, to the owner on behalf of the youth leasing a specified unit. So this is the housing subsidy that is offered. The public housing authority pays the housing assistance payment, and the housing assistance payment is the difference between the payment standard and the youth rent portion paid directly to the landlord. Once the rent amount is agreed upon, the legal documents regarding tenancy must be signed by the youth, the landlord, and the public housing authority. And this just includes like a standard lease. So that was the life cycle of connecting an eligible youth with a FYI voucher. We just wanted to do a quick recap of responsibilities by stakeholders. First, we have the local Department of Social Services, or as we refer to, the LDSS. They are ultimately responsible for certifying the youth meets eligibility requirements for the FYI initiative, and they are also responsible for referring that eligible youth to the Public Housing Authority. The Public Housing Authority receives that referral and maintains that written certification from the LDSS for audit purposes. They also place the youth on the wait list and undertake the waitlist administration process. And they screen the youth and determine the youth eligibility based on the Public Housing Authority eligibility requirements. And they also work with the prospective landlord to enter a HAP contract to dispense the subsidy on behalf of the youth. Supportive service partners work alongside the youth to match and provide them with eligible services. They help to integrate the youth into a community's plan to prevent youth homelessness, and they work alongside a continuum of care to utilize coordinated entry to identify youth with welfare history that may be disconnected from an LDSS. And finally, we have the youth who are central to this entire process. They are the ones who apply to the FYI waitlist once referred. They provide eligibility documentation. They're the ones who find themselves housing, and they complete that request for tenancy approval. And that is all for the life cycle. I believe now we have some poll questions to do a quick knowledge check. So I'll pass this off.
Awesome. Thank you, Atticus. No, that was a lot of information to take in, everyone. Again, these slides will be distributed, right? So you can review them in depth. First poll question, getting into it. Pull up that link if you have it. Who is responsible to issue the voucher to youth? The youth, the public housing authority, supportive service partner, or the local department of social services? All right, seeing a lot of public housing authority. Give us a second here, but overwhelmingly seeing public housing authority, that is correct, right? The PHA is actually going to issue that voucher to the eligible youth. Supportive service partners or local departments of social service will provide that referral to the PHA and certify that they're eligible for the program, but the public housing authority is the one that's going to actually issue that voucher, which is effectively that subsidy. All righty, let's move into question 7. And that is, who is responsible to certify that a youth meets the foster care eligibility requirements? I might have just gave this one away. That's a hint. Y'all got me. All right, it's looking really good so far. I think we're gonna have 100% pass rate on this one, and that is the local departments of social services are certifying, right, that a youth meets those eligible requirements. Getting into the next question, question 8. Who is responsible to sign the HAP contract with the landlord? This one is a little bit tricky. So there's 2 documents, right? You have, actually there's 3 documents. You have a HAP contract, housing assistance payment contract that Atticus mentioned. You have your lease, that's another document. That's gonna be between the youth and the landlord. And then you have what's called a rights and responsibilities. We didn't go over that, but that is a PHA and youth document. The HAP contract is going to actually be between the landlord and the public housing authority. So we got a split there. So want to definitely clarify that housing assistance payment contract is between the public housing authority and the landlord. And that is the document that is certifying that the public housing authority is going to provide that subsidy directly to the landlord, that housing assistant payment contract directly to the landlord to subsidize that rent for the youth. The youth is going to pay the other 30%, approximately. Last question to get into in this set of polls is, how can supportive service agencies help youth throughout the FYI lifecycle? Accompany a youth when searching for a unit, attending the PHA voucher briefing, telling the youth what to do without any explanation, or managing the FYI voucher waitlist. And there should be multiple options. This question, apologies if it is not letting you select multiple options. We're getting some really good answers so far. It's silly watching all these dots congregate, isn't it? All right, so we'll go ahead and pull it here so we can have enough time to get through the rest. But y'all largely got the 2 answers that we were looking for, and that is to accompany a youth when searching for a unit and attend a voucher briefing. I really think it's important, right, to attend that voucher briefing with the applicant. It just gives you a really good understanding of the housing process, so you're informed on the backside, and it helps you be able to address any questions or comments that may come up with youth as you're helping them move through the process. Perfect. All right. With that said, I'm going to turn it back over to Shelley to talk about a case study here in Virginia.
Thanks, Jamie. Yeah, so I know that was a lot of information about the FYI life cycle, and we've talked through a lot of things already. So just kind of wanted to bring it all together with a case study to give you a model, a successful locality of who has implemented this initiative. So we're going to talk a little bit about Virginia Beach. Virginia Beach has 3 partners that work together to administer FYI. So first is the Virginia Beach Department of Human Services. So they fill that local Department of Social Services role. On the housing side, we have the Department of Housing and Preservation, and then they partner with a nonprofit called Connect with a Wish to provide these supportive services. So these 3 entities work together, and some things that they had noted to us was that it took them a really long time to establish their initiative. They were confused in the beginning. There weren't that many people in Virginia establishing the initiative at that time, and they just had to read and read and read. And so it took them 1 year to establish the initiative. So just wanted to note that, hopefully today you have other resources and other localities and kind of can build off of what other people have created, but just trying to flag that it can take some time to get started with FYI. So they have not 19 vouchers that are active today, 19 youth that have apartments and are living in those apartments. So that's really amazing to see. And they also noted that in the beginning, it would take them months to get a youth voucher. They would identify a youth and it would just kind of take a long time. And now they were able to get it down to 6 to 8 weeks from referring that youth to signing that HAP contract. So that's the whole FYI life cycle in 6 to 8 weeks, which is much faster that now that they're kind of experts at this. Which is really awesome. So one of the things that they, noted of why they're so successful is because of their close collaboration. They have points of contact at each organization and agency, and they meet every other week to just touch base on, what's going on and kind of things that they need to do to move forward. The Department of Human Services also noted that, when they get this process started, even before the referral, they have a meeting with the youth just to let them know what this process entails. It's a lot. We just went through all of it and it took a really long time and it's just really complex. So kind of breaking it down a little bit for them and, not just at that point, it can be overwhelming already. So having a point in time where they're going to touch base with the youth in the future. So saying, hey, you're here now, let's follow up in 2 weeks, come back, we'll have another conversation and we can keep working towards this. So having that set point. On the nonprofit side, the supportive services side with Connect with the Wish, something that they do that has been really beneficial is accompanying youth during the housing search. And Atticus spoke about this a little bit before about how overwhelming it could be just looking for an apartment or a place to live. So going with them, is probably the first time that they're doing this and kind of walking them through that process and just being an additional person there to ask questions and be a support there. And in addition, they noted that they can have the apartment, but then there's also now you have an empty apartment. So how do you get furniture? How do you make it a place that's really habitable? And so youth may not have the resources to really furnish their apartment. So leveraging community organizations that collect donations and can kind of distribute these out to the youth. So they help them with that. And then in addition, it's you have the voucher, but you still have to put down your security deposit, and that can be a whole month of rent. And so helping youth leverage community organizations again to kind of help with that. And then the last thing we wanted to note was that the Department of Housing and Preservation, you know, they have the connections with the landlords. Landlords may be hesitant to lease to these youth. So having a meeting where they briefed the landlords on the FYI voucher, and they had Connect with the Wish and the Department of Human Services come and speak to them about this voucher and kind of breaking down that barrier as well. So that's just a short case study on Virginia Beach that we wanted to talk through a little bit. And then now we're going to move into getting started. I know there are a bunch of questions in our chat, so I'll try to move through this section a little quickly so that we can get to your questions and address those as well. So getting started with FYI and establishing the initiative. So some things that you can all do, whoever you are on the call, you know, start establishing your partnership agreements as an LDSS, a PHA, or for a service partner. You can kind of step up and be the initiator of that. Second, you know, start identifying eligible youth, engaging them in the process. This is really, really key. You know, you have to identify youth and the need when you're applying. So starting to identify youth and talk to youth in the beginning of the process is super important. When you're ready, you know, the Public Housing Authority can go ahead and apply for those HUD vouchers, you know, whether non-competitive or competitive. As a reminder, non-competitive are on demand. Once you've identified youth. Competitive, you will have to reply to a notice of funding opportunity. And then the last thing is, you know, hosting informational sessions, whether for youth, whether for, you know, other members of your, you know, organizations, let them know what you're trying to start the initiative, or even, you know, landlords, things like that. So starting to get started there. Moving into a couple of challenges that you may face in getting started. So the first is, you know, people tend to have a hard time establishing partnership agreements. So it requires a local Department of Social Services, a PHA, and then usually a supportive service partner. So you need to bring them all together to work on these initiatives. So, you know, it might be hard to do that, whether someone has lack of funding or capacity. So just if you're the initiator of this, really approach the partner and make it as easy as possible, you know, make it as simple as can be. Provide them with a template. So in our appendix, you'll see that there is, you know, a template from HUD of like how to, of the MOU. So it's really just filling in the details there. And, you know, set up meetings with them. Like we talked about before, once you have people on a call, it's kind of easier to move things through. The second thing Atticus also touched upon before, which is updating the administrative plan. So public housing authorities may think, you know, let me wait till I get the funding and then I'll update my admin plan so that I know that I'm actually going to be administering this initiative. The problem with that is that it can cause delays with the process and lead to non-compliance issues. So just make sure that you update your admin plan before you submit your application, just to avoid those delays. The next thing is HUD wait time. And, you know, we talked about this a little bit earlier as well, is that, you know, it can take a long time to get those vouchers, up to 6 months if you're applying for competitive vouchers. It's usually shorter, you know, with non-competitive applications, but just think about that as you're establishing these initiatives and how, you know, it might take some time. So some things to think about here is just when you're submitting your application, try to make sure that they're really comprehensive and complete so that you don't have any issues there. And then for your public housing authority, something you can do here is really leverage your relationships with your local HUD representatives. They can kind of clue you into things that are going on and give you some updates and maybe help you with your application. So try to leverage those relationships as best as you can. And then the last thing here is the demonstrated need. So, you know, when you're applying, you have to say, we have this need. You know, either with non-competitive, you need to say, we have these specific youth. And with competitive, you know, you need to give an estimated number. So, that data is not necessarily readily available. So trying to be as proactive as you can and, you know, kind of right from the beginning. And I talked about this, you know, in our previous slides of start identifying youth right from the beginning and engaging them in the process and tracking that information. So those are some challenges. Hopefully, those best practices can help you move things along a little faster as you start establishing your initiatives. And then the last thing is, engaging youth. I just touched upon it. I've touched upon it before, and I'll touch upon it again because it's super, super important. They're the focus here. And so you want to identify the youth. You want to see if they're interested in transitioning. Gauging interest of those youth who are transitioning out. If they're interested in this initiative, right? You know who those youth are who are transitioning out. Maybe they want to get an FYI voucher. So that's something where you can start with engaging youth. And another thing that you can think about is, the best way to kind of connect people, in my opinion, is like, if I know someone has done something before and they're telling me to do it, it's very different than some other person telling me. So connecting someone who's in the same boat, someone who's used the voucher, someone who's, thinking about, been through this process, connecting them with a youth who's thinking about it, that can be a really valuable relationship for them and kind of like a point of contact, a peer support person, that can help them through the process or just, let them know what they can benefit from here. The next thing is, informational sessions about FYI can be super helpful just to let them know like what this is and how it works and how it can benefit them. And then the last thing is, it's not just the beginning, it's not just the middle, it's not just the end. It's like the whole process, right? Like it's a long process, it's a complex process, and making sure that you're clearly communicating to them what they need to do, what's required of them, and really providing the support for them along the way. So it could be discouraging. So like having people there to support them can kind of help them move through the process. So, whatever stakeholder you are on this call, look at the slide and think about like which of these things you can do to engage you. Okay, we'll move to our last mentee poll, which is what are some steps you can take to get the FYI initiative up and running in your locality? Alrighty. You got some multi-select here. So your 4 options are host informational sessions, begin engaging youth, start the housing search with youth, and establish a partnership agreement. Okay. It looks like we're starting to level out here a little bit. We have our orange, purple, and yellow colors rising to the top. So yes, hosting informational sessions are very helpful in getting started, getting up and running. Engaging youth, always a priority. And as you said, identifying the youth who may be interested in this program, and then establishing a partnership agreement as well, bringing those entities together so you can apply for those funds. The housing search is something that you will do, but much later on in the process once you've established your initiative and you're moving through the cycle. Okay, I will take the screen back now. We're going to do our closing. Just a few things that we wanted to note as we close is I'm going to pass it over to our BDSS team to talk about some upcoming changes to FYI.
Thanks, Shelley.
Oh, go ahead, Lisa.
Okay. We heard from youth, local Department of Social Services, and statewide FYI group that youth are often restricted to applying for FYI vouchers only within the locality that had custody of them due to limitations with the PHA jurisdiction and administrative structures. This decentralized process hindered our young people who relocated for educational, familiar, or employment opportunities outside their originating locality. But I have some good news. BDSS have received permission to enter the MOU in an effort to centralize it and ensure all youth in Virginia have access to the FYI voucher. And so this initiative will address the pressing need to support youth transitioning from foster care to independent living. VDSS proposes a more coordinated, a centralized approach that allow for expanded access and better alignment between the child welfare and the housing services. So we are hoping to collaborate with Virginia Public Housing Authorities through a MOU. Now, y'all need to be patient with us. This is the first time we have done something this big, but we really think it would help to alleviate that barrier and youth can live where they want to live. So you'll hear more about that in the coming weeks, months, but I just wanted to share that exciting information. Gwen?
Hi, everybody. This is Gwen Castillo. I will see if I can spotlight myself, but I am the current FYI coordinator of the work group and kind of our program right now. And we just wanted to include this slide, and I'll say this quickly, just to say a huge thank you to the people who are currently in our work group, especially our sub work group leaders who hold meetings outside of the times we meet as a large work group. And really, this is how we made this happen, that we knew we needed to get outside help, that we knew we needed to come together, that we knew we needed to bridge cooperative action between all of these different stakeholders and partners. So a huge thank you to them. On the left are some of our sub work group leaders, and on the right is a word cloud that I made of all of the different organizations that are involved with us. And they range from LDSS, VDSS, youth, nonprofit agencies, public housing authorities, other people interested in this process who may interact with youth. And again, just a huge thank you. And if you have any interest in this or would like to join our work group, Shelley will talk about a way you can give us your contact information following this, but you can also reach out to me. And thank you again so much, and we'll go forward.
Thanks, Gwen. We're now going to move into our Q&A. And, we have some questions in the chat that we'll walk through. If you have additional questions, feel free to drop them in the chat. We'll try to address as many as we can in the last 10 minutes. Two things to note before we move forward to our questions is that during this time, I'll be dropping a survey in the chat about this training. So you can fill that out on that survey. You can indicate if you're interested in joining the FYI work group. So just take a look at that. In addition, we'll also drop the registration links for FYI 201, which are next Tuesday and next Thursday at 1 p.m. We're doing it twice, so hopefully more people can attend and join those as well. So those will be coming into the chat, but I will pass it over to Jamie to walk through some questions.
Awesome. Thanks, Shelley.
Sorry, quick, Jamie. I just want to say for people who, and like we said, we are going to share, this is being recorded, this is going to be shared, and you will be able to share it with others who may not have been able to attend. However, some people may be attending. I know a lot of people who are attending now and I have their information. Some of you I may not know. Please fill out that survey so I can get your information to make sure to send all of these resources, the PowerPoint with all of the links and the recordings to you. So please do complete the survey. Thank you.
Awesome. I'm going to go ahead and jump into questions so we can address as many as possible and recommend you stay on just so you get all the correct information. So first one I'm going to call out is to specify you should probably not get into the FYI program if they're not able to fund at least 30% of their rent, since the full rent is not covered through the program. I noted the correct answer in the chat, but just to clarify, FYI participants, HCV, Housing Choice Voucher participants in general, are required to pay at least 30% of their adjusted monthly income towards rent in most cases. However, they may have to pay more than 30% if the rent for their chosen unit exceeds that payment standard that Atticus talked about earlier. PHAs do offer what's called a hardship exemption. You have to apply for that. So supportive services providers, whoever's supporting the youth through the process, if you do need a hardship exemption, talk to the PHA up front, let them know they're going to need likely a hardship exemption, and get that filled out so that you can get that processed. It does take some time for PHAs to grant that hardship exemption. They might have to figure out a way to pay first month's rent, right? So get that process moving as soon as you can. Another question that I did want to cover up front, and that is a voucher able to be converted to standard voucher before or at time out? So a bit of a confusing process. As a best practice, public housing authorities are allowed to add what's called a FYI preference to their administrative plan. If you're an LDSS agency, take this information, go back to your PHA that you're working with and tell them about it if they don't know about it, right? So what that preference does is it allows them to give priority to FYI youth that are aging out of the voucher. They've reached that 5-year time limitation, or 3-year if they don't have the extension. They've reached that time limit. They still don't have access to stable housing. They haven't been able to identify what their next step is going to be without that voucher. It can prioritize them on the general housing choice voucher waitlist for a voucher. So it won't necessarily automatically transition. They'll have to attend another briefing, that sort of thing, and go through the process again, but they can be added to the waitlist to get moved into a housing choice voucher. Okay, next question. Youth aging out of fostering futures at 21. They will no longer be eligible after 180 days from them. That's not necessarily correct, right? So you can accept referrals for the FYI program for youth 18 to 24 years old. They just have to have that history of being in foster care. So if they age out, they come to you at 23, they were in fostering futures, or they even weren't in fostering futures, right? They were just in traditional foster care. If they have that history of foster care, they are eligible for the program if they meet the other eligibility criteria as well. Next question. If a PHA uses 50 vouchers in a year, can they get more the next year, or do they need to wait until a tenant leaves the voucher program? So it's 50 non-competitive vouchers maximum annually. If there is a need in that year, if you're seeing a need within that 1 year, more than 50 vouchers, that's great. Go ahead and apply for competitive and non-competitive vouchers, right? Apply for both. It's 50 annually. The next year, allocation starts over, we can apply for another 25 at a time. Okay, I see a specific question here. We, Norfolk DSS, were able to utilize FYI in 2020, 2021. But as of a few weeks ago, in our HA, the Housing Authority informed us they have no additional vouchers to provide. We only utilized it for 2-3 of our foster youth. How should we go about asking if in our HA can request additional vouchers? Do just that, right? Have a conversation with them. See if they are able to or willing to request vouchers, and tell them how easy it is, right? Tell them, I went to this great training that told me that non-competitive vouchers are on demand and we have the need for vouchers. We need these additional vouchers. Provide the referrals and certifications up front. Tell them we have 5 folks that need these vouchers. It's an easy process. Here's the link. If you want the link, look in the PowerPoint, come to 201. And it only takes 20 minutes plus the time it takes to enter that letter of intent or MOU if you're going that route, to ensure that you can provide these youth vouchers. Non-competitive really does not take that long. So come up front, tell them how to do it, make it as easy as possible for them to apply to that program. Are local PHAs mandated to participate or offer these vouchers? Unfortunately, they are not, but like I said, making it as easy as possible for the Public Housing Authority, who is the agency that's applying for the funding, to apply for that funding is the key to getting this program off the ground, right? Come to them with a letter of intent that you already have filled out. Come to them and say, we already identified these supportive service providers that can assist the youth, and it's going to be as easy as possible for your agency to get these vouchers. We're going to help you along the way. Unfortunately, not mandated, make it easy for them. So we could use an MOU that was previously developed for FUP vouchers. Apologies if this was not clear. So FUP and FYI technically are different. You would need to enter a separate MOU if the previous MOU that you entered was only for FUP. If you have entered for an FYI program previously, so you already have competitive FYI vouchers, you can say, we're using that same MOU to administer this new allocation of vouchers that we're applying for. That is when you can provide the written certification that you're entering under the same MOU. If they obtain a voucher at 24 years and 10 months, they retain their voucher past the age of 25, or does it automatically convert to a standard HCV? They just need to be referred before they turn 25. And then they have, the 5 years of standard time, or 3 years of standard time plus the 2-year extension. Just need to be referred before. It will not convert to a standard HCV. They'll have that FYI voucher for the 3 to 5 years. Can you explain the difference between the application process for awarding competitive and non-competitive? We went into that a bit today. We will go into more depth in FYI 201 about what the application process looks like. It just takes a while to kind of get into the nitty-gritty, right? So I do recommend, if you really want to see more specific differences between the two programs and just how easy it can be for the non-competitive program, try to join a training next Tuesday or Thursday. If not, it will be posted. You can review it, you can listen to it, and you can access those materials. Are FYI vouchers portable, or do the youth need to maintain housing in the issuing locality? So this is a question that I think has come up multiple times. So a couple things. In a public housing authority's administrative plan, they're going to talk about their portability policy, right? Youth are able to port their voucher. So porting means moving from one area in the state to another, or moving out of state. They're able to do that. They do have to follow the portability procedures that are written in a public housing authority's administrative plan. So some PHAs may have different governing restrictions related to portability, but generally they should be able to port the voucher. A couple things and actually, sorry, to clarify even further, there was new guidance in April that said PHAs are not able to restrict portability for FYI vouchers specifically, right? So no restrictions for portability for FYI vouchers. I do want to note, though, that if a FYI participant, they're enrolled in the program, they port to another public housing authority, and that public housing authority does not have a FYI program, they may not have access to those supportive services anymore. So if there's a certain supportive service agency that's providing supportive services in the locality that they were in previously, they might not be able to provide the youth those services anymore because they're pretty far away. They could be in another state. And the PHA that they're porting to may not have a program, may not be able to provide supportive services or an FSS program for them to enroll in to get those supportive services either. It's a really important piece that you should really think about, you should help youth think about, right, before they port.
We're at time, so I know there were a bunch more questions in the chat. So I think, we will be addressing a bunch of them in 201 Beyond the Basics. That's next Tuesday and Thursday at 1. So if you can register for that and join us for those, we'd love for you to join, and hopefully we can answer some more of your questions there. But we are at our 2-hour mark, and we do have to wrap up. But I wanted to say thank you all for joining today. It's really awesome to see so many of you on this call. And really, if you can fill out the survey, that would really be amazing so that we have all the information and feedback on the training. Anything to add, Letha, Gwen, before we wrap up?
I am sure Letha will reiterate this. We just want to give, and please share the love in the chat, a huge shout out to Guidehouse. Without them, like truly none of this improvement and further ideas and goals would be possible. And we are so appreciative that they joined us and that we were able to like make this work.
Hello, Gwen. Marvelous job. Thank you so much, Guidehouse. And again, thank you all that found this so important to attend this training. And thank you for accepting our call to action. We'll be reaching out.
Have a great rest of your day, everyone.
Thank you all.
Bye.
Thank you, everybody. And I will now stop recording.